Hello there, and welcome to the Showing Up to Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns, and I'm coming at you on a very special day today. I just realized this. First of all, this is a very impromptu podcast episode today. I do not have anything planned. Was not planning to do an episode, but I just heard something on another YouTube channel that inspired me to talk to you today. So hopefully it's going to be like sort of a stream of consciousness episode today. No notes at all, not even an idea of what the title is going to be. So let's see how it goes. But first of all, it is a very special day today. Okay. I don't know if you all realize this, but I think I read that every 33 years, Ramadan, Passover, and Easter Sunday all occur at the same time. And here we are. So happy Easter, happy Passover, and happy Ramadan to all of you, no matter what it is that you celebrate. And then also for those of you who do not celebrate religiously, Easter is also seen as a pagan holiday, as the that celebrates the arrival of spring. So if that fits you, then I wish you the happy arrival for spring today. And so thanks for tuning in. I wish you well. And so what I want to talk to you about, I've recently discovered this YouTube channel of a guy, I don't even know his name. He's actually only done like 6 or 7 videos, I think, at this point, maybe 10. So it's a fresh YouTube channel. So I will certainly send you the link if you want it. Just email me at art@artburnscoaching.com and I'll get that over to you. But anyway, the channel that this guy does, the guy is a psychiatrist. Okay, he's a resident psychiatrist. I looked him up, and I don't remember his name now, but I did Google him when I first found the channel a couple of weeks ago, and he's a resident psychiatrist at a hospital, right? And he's also a crime buff, so as am I. So he does these videos of sort of analyzing from a psychiatry and a psychology standpoint, people who have done true crimes, like real, like Jared Lautner was the one that he was just talking about today, where he's talking about schizophrenia, okay? And so I'm not going to get into all the science of what he was talking about. You can go watch his channel for that. But what I do want to tell you that's really interesting, he said something, he got a little woo-woo at the end there, at the end of his video today, where he was talking about some of the biological and the genetic markers for people who eventually develop schizophrenia, right? And that there are, sort of telltale signs that are, again, genetic as well as biological. And there's also some substance triggers that can happen. There's a lot of social triggers that can happen. And so he was talking about all this. And at one point, he was at sort of at the end of the video, he was suggesting that if you do have the, biological markers, for instance, schizophrenia is a very hereditable condition, right? So if you're a parent of yours had schizophrenia, then you have like a 40% chance of developing schizophrenia, as opposed to the general public, which is like a little less than 1%, or like a little less than 1.5% or something like that. And so he was talking about, if you do have some of these genetic or biological markers for schizophrenia, and he was also getting into things like bipolar disorder. I'm sorry, not bipolar, but borderline personality disorder, and talking about all these sort of things as this, in that realm, right? And so he said there were 2 things that we can do to give ourselves some help with this, right? To sort of, not that it's necessarily going to prevent the onset of schizophrenia, but it could change the onset of schizophrenia, and it might even prevent it, if you're at a certain level on the likelihood, right? Like those people, with the really, certain markings, it's like they're almost certainly going to get it no matter what they do, right? But there are other people in the spectrum of percentages where, there are things that you can do that to intervene on your behalf, okay? And this is what really made me want to talk to you about this, okay? Because he said 2 specific things, right? He said first, well, the first one I'm going to name to you, but it was the second one that he mentioned, was having a social network, right? Like developing a connection to others, right? To be able to, because one of the things that one of the potential triggers for the onset of schizophrenia is abandonment wounds, right? Like if you had abandonment wounds, and this is also part of borderline personality disorder, that if you have abandonment wounds from childhood, right, which is something I share, which is like, what? I really listen when people talk about that, that later in life, if you experience abandonment again, that can induce the psychosis, which might or might not result ultimately in schizophrenia or the diagnosis of schizophrenia, right? So having a network of friends, basically, and having people who care about you and people for whom you care as well. And what that does is, in a very pragmatic sense, if you do become abandoned by one person, at least you have this network of others that sort of, mitigates that effect, right? The impact of that, right? Because you're not completely solitary, right? Like in a lot of cases, and this has certainly happened with me now, that, my wife and I have become each other's like pretty much soul friends. And now in the dissolving of my marriage, there's a very lonely feeling to that, right? And so thankfully I'm not experiencing psychosis from it, but that ultimately could be something that somebody else with the right sort of constellation of biological and genetic markers might actually, that's something that could push them over that edge, right? But here's the part that I really wanted to talk to you about today. But I think we're going to get back to that sense of connection, right? Because as you know, when we practice mindfulness, right, the idea or the concept and the practice of connection is very, very much a part of it, right? The Buddha, and as you know, I'm not a Buddhist. I'm Buddhist curious, if you will. I'm very interested in it. I'm also interested in a lot of different Eastern philosophies. But the Buddha himself said that the very original teaching of the Buddha, the very first teaching that he gave, was that all suffering arises from the delusion of separateness. The delusion that somehow I am a separate entity out here and I'm not connected, I'm not interconnected with the rest of the universe, which we are, right? And so that's very important to the work, or very salient to the work that we talk about here on the channel here. So I'm going to get back to that in a second, hopefully within this stream of consciousness. But the thing that this doctor also said, and I can't remember the guy's name. It's some Dutch name like Vander or something, not Bessel van der Kolk. I would know that, but it's that kind of last name. I'll put it in the description. Certainly, I'll send you the link if you want it. So just email me. I'll send you the link, and maybe we can, talk about his channel, because it's really, really fascinating stuff for any of you who are true crime buffs like me, and also mental health buffs like me, and neuroscience buffs like me. Anyway, the other thing that he was saying was, he talked about, as a means of intervention in this, because basically what schizophrenia is a psychosis that just becomes permanent, right? So a psychosis is when you just, you don't see reality the way that everyone else sees reality, right? And so what he's talking about is an intervening process to that, or something that could be an intervention against that development in one's psyche, is to pay attention to that within you that is eternal. And he admitted, he was like, I know this is going to sound like, woo-woo and stuff. I don't remember the exact term he used, but he knows that he's being less than scientific at that point, right? Although there are a lot of neuroscientists who are giving a lot of validity to this concept too, right? But let me tell you what he said, and this is really what I want to, the nuts and bolts of what I want to get into with you today here. It's not a really long point, but it's a really important point. So consciousness, right? That is the thing within us that is has always been there, right? So he talked about consciousness, and he admits, and I will tell you that nobody knows what consciousness is, right? Like there's lots of theories about what consciousness is, but there's nobody that can say, oh yeah, we have our consciousness, we put it in a jar on the on the shelf of our laboratory, and we did it over and over and over, and here it is, right? That's science, right? And that does not exist for consciousness. We simply do not know what consciousness is, right? We know that we experience consciousness. We can describe the experience of consciousness, but we can't necessarily or can't really define it, right? To say like, this is what it is and it's nothing else but this, right? Aside from a lot of theoretical stuff that's out there, right? And again, that theoretical stuff has been going on since the Buddha, right? Like since before the Buddha, right? 3,000 years ago, right? So, but here's the thing that this wonderful psychiatrist was talking about this morning in this video, and he literally posted it like 9 hours before I saw it, so sometimes last night. So, but he said that consciousness is more like light than it is like matter, right? Which is to say that it's more of a wave than it is a particle, right? Light, as this doctor explained or pointed out, light is the same everywhere you see it, whether it's a light from a photo lamp, a light from a candle behind me, a light from the sun, a light from a headlight, from a flashlight, from a cell phone, whatever it is, light is always the same thing. It's photons moving through space at a speed of 186,000 miles per second plus a little bit, and that's what it is. But what's really important about that is that's what it's always been. Forever. Anytime there was light in this universe, it was the same light that we're experiencing now. And so consciousness is very much the same, right? So the way that you experience consciousness is the same way that every being who has ever experienced consciousness has experienced consciousness. In other words, a Neanderthal walking around, a million years ago. Don't quote me on the dates. It could be a few 100,000 years ago, but whatever it is, but a long, 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 long time ago, that consciousness that person or those people experienced was the exact same consciousness that you experience and that I experience. It hasn't changed. Consciousness is consciousness. And so this, of course, got me, as you know, my focus in my work and what we talk about here is on, things like compassion and things like understanding and having compassion for suffering, right? And this is what I really wanted to drive home here today is that suffering, like light, like consciousness, is always the same. And it always has been for all time. Since the very first being, which, suffering requires sentience as we understand it, right? Sentience is consciousness in a very real way, right? It's the consciousness of the idea that I am alive, but that I am vulnerable to not being alive, right? Like I am not invincible, and that I can experience pain and I can experience suffering, and that most importantly, I don't want to experience pain and suffering. Right? Now, for instance, from what we know and understand, although we're starting to see things about fish that is opening some really important doors here, but as far as we know, reptiles, they do not have this sentience. Well, I guess they have sentience, but we don't know that they suffer because they don't experience emotions, right? And so the suffering, and let's not get into that division. Let's set that aside for a second. Let's leave those lizards alone and assume that they're sentient and they're experiencing suffering. But the point that I'm trying to make, right, is that the suffering that we feel, just like the emotional response to the suffering, well, first of all, as I always point out to you and anyone else who will listen to me, right, is that we experience everything from the moment we were, well, not the moment we were born, because at that point we don't have such conscious understanding, right? We don't have self-awareness, right? Until we're about like 2 years old or something like that, right? Where we start understanding that I am a separate self. I am not connected to that person who I've been, attached to for all this time. I'm a separate self. Right? Like that's a biological, physiological development that happens at around 1.5, 2 years old, I believe. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. Certainly, I know somebody out there who knows, because the people who listen to this channel are just wicked smart, and I love you all. But the but the idea here, right, is that from the moment that we have that sense of self and that self-awareness, right, that we experience every single moment of our lives. Not just when things are happening, right? Not just experiencing going to the store or doing laundry or eating or drinking, but even the times in between, even when you're just sitting there doing nothing, right? We experience everything in 3 specific realms. We experience things in the realm of the body, in terms of a physical experience, right? Because even if you're having a thought, there's a physical correlate to that thought. Okay, I'm going to get into that in a second. We experience everything as an emotional experience, and we experience everything as a thought experience, as a thought-based, and most of the time what we talk about when we talk about the thought experience is the sort of, mental chatter that's going on for all of us constantly through all of our waking hours, even when we're sleeping technically, right? But it's just a different sort of chatter. We don't really remember. We don't hear it so well. Okay, but the idea, though, is that if we look at every experience as an experience of the body, the emotions, and the thoughts, right? Well, then suffering is an experience of the body, the emotions, and the thoughts, right? And so when we picture a Neanderthal, for me, I'm picturing a Neanderthal man, but maybe you're picturing a woman or a child or something. But hundreds of thousands of years ago, right? That person experienced suffering, right? They experienced times where, maybe they broke their leg. Maybe they, almost froze to death. Maybe they were, running from a saber-toothed tiger, right? Maybe it's all of these things happen to every single one of those people is very likely, right? And so the important thing to recognize, or the thing that I want you to hear right now, is that those people experienced that suffering as a physical experience, right? Like if they're running from a saber-toothed tiger, they're feeling the tension and the sympathetic nervous system response that you feel when you're late for work. It's the same feeling. It's the same mechanism that we have, that they had. I mean, it's evolved and stuff. Of course, it's not exactly the same, but it's at its very core and its base, it's the same thing. They experience the emotion of fear. Oh, crap, that saber-toothed tiger is going to kill me. I'm afraid. And they experience some form of mental chatter. Run, 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 run. Get out of here. Look for a place to hide. Get away from this tiger. In whatever language, right? I mean, of course, they're not speaking English like I am, but the point is, though, that the experience that they had, just like the consciousness that they experienced, is the same experience of suffering that you experience. Just like the same experience of pleasure is the same. I mean, we know that they had sex. We know that they ate. We know that, I mean, there's evidence of them, of primitive cultures using, mind-altering substances. So we know that there was this dynamic experience of the body, the emotions, the thoughts, just like you and I experience. And this is really important because this is the thing that is eternal in us. And I would argue, and this is, I mean, partially my belief, right? Because nobody can go back 200,000 years ago and ask the first human beings, like, hey, what does it feel like to suffer, But that brings up an interesting point too, right? If you asked 100 people, to describe the feeling of suffering, you're going to get like 200 different descriptions, right? Because it's so subjective, right? Like the way that we suffer is our own, right? Like the way we interpret our suffering is our own, and it's very subjective. Just like the causes of the suffering are very subjective. And here's where I would look at something like, how is it that, emergency room nurses can handle this enormous level of stress and never seem to suffer through it, right? They do it and they survive, they perform, they save lives. Whereas other people, like if you put me in that situation, I'd last 10 minutes before I'm trying to crawl under somebody's desk and hide, And yet I would experience enormous stress in an experience that is completely, not as difficult as what these nurses are experiencing. So what we're talking about then is that the causes and the perception and the interpretation of suffering, and just like anything else in our experiences, is very, very subjective. But the suffering itself, just like the consciousness that describes the suffering for us and interprets the suffering for us, is exactly the same, just like light. Just like light, that the light coming out of that bulb right here is no different from the light that came from the very first campfire that an primitive human being started. It's just photons moving through the air, moving through space, I should say, at a speed of 186,000 miles per second. And that's the same thing with our suffering. And that's the same thing with our emotions. The emotion of fear that you feel right now is the exact same as that person 200,000 years felt. And it's the exact same that somebody in your home is feeling right now also. It's the same suffering, the same experience of whatever it is. Like we want to talk about the experience of the emotions, or the experience of the suffering itself, or the experience of joy. It's one joy, not your joy and my joy. It's joy. We just experience joy subjectively, based on our history, our biology, our genetics, our state of consciousness, right? And just ask anybody who smokes a big bong hit, right? That they all of a sudden get very joyous for no reason at all, right? And so this is the important thing or I should say, it's an important thing to call our attention to recognize that we are all experiencing these things exactly the same way that we always have experienced them. Because again, the reason for this, okay, the reason I'm telling you all this today is because by experiencing it this way, by noticing that the suffering that I'm experiencing is the same suffering that 200,000 years ago the humans then suffered, and everyone in between, for the last 200,000 years, and for as long as human beings populate this planet, the suffering is going to be the same. The tension in the body is going to be the same. The emotions are the same. The mental chatter, the fact that there is mental chatter, is common to all of us. And so what this does is this fosters and cultivates a sense of connection. A sense of interbeing. Because without your suffering, my suffering can't exist either. Because it's the same suffering. And so when we bring our awareness to this and we cultivate an awareness of this, that's really compassion, or that's the basis of compassion, and the basis also of empathy and sympathetic joy, right? which is the ability to feel someone else's joy. We can do that with a little bit of practice. You can do that. I mean, our biology is set up for it. We know that. Between the mirror neurons in our brain and the resonance of our vagus nerve and the way that our heartbeats will sync up to each other as we're, talking to each other, right? The way that, there's been a lot of studies done with women, like, in college dorm rooms and stuff, where their menstrual cycles will sync up. Right? This isn't just like a mistake, right? It's because we are constantly resonating. We are interconnected with one another. And the more we can, pay attention to that interconnectedness, that sameness, that togetherness, the less we are going to suffer from the delusion of separateness. So this is how I brought it back to a mindfulness lesson. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you're all having a great day also, but I hope you enjoyed today's episode and let me know, okay? Send me a comment and let me know what you think of today's episode, okay? Because this was literally one of those, I was just walking to the store and back and I was like, I got to do a podcast. And I'm sure there's some stuff I forgot to say and stuff, but that's cool. I think I got the important stuff. So anyway, hope you enjoyed it. I wish you well, and I'll see you again soon. Take care, everybody, and happy holidays, whatever holiday it is that you celebrate. I hope you're celebrating it, or even not celebrating it, but I hope that you're taking some time to feel into your own experience. Okay, and that's an important thing too, right? That is a subjective thing, that you don't have to celebrate the holidays just like everyone else does. You don't have to celebrate anything at all, right? And that does not invalidate you and your experience. Maybe we'll talk about that next time. All right, everybody, take care. Hope you're doing well. Have a great day.